Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Just Another Kill Team podcast, connecting kill team communities across the globe. If you're passionate about the tactical skirmish game that brings together strategy, lore, and creativity, you are in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay updated with our latest episodes. If you want to support the show, check out our Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. Follow us by using the social media links in the podcast description for all the latest news, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you think. Thanks for tuning in. Here's today's episode. You guys, we are here, and we've got Zack here. Zack is about to fill your ear holes with some knowledge.
Mostly around the team format, just because Zack is one of the, people who's traveled a fair bit for teams, and also not just teams of you and your friends, right? I think that's probably the why we brought you on here, because teams is generally a format that most of us expect. We're just going to play with our friends, but when you get to these larger regional tournaments like the World Team Championship, or, if we ever get up to what 40K does with 8-person teams, maybe you're not always going to be friends with everyone. You'll be friendly with people. But Zack, you've done the All Valley Team Tournament down in SoCal, which is a 3-person teams, and you were just the head of the United Nations team at the World Team Championships, where you had I don't actually know what the spread of players was from your team. You want to talk a little bit about getting the band together?
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of interesting. I'm just pulling up. I want to make sure I get all of the nationalities right here. Yeah, so it was essentially a bunch of people who could make the singles event or were close to the area, but may or may not have a team that they could join. And so I'll just run down the list here. So it was Mateo from Catalonia and Taiwan. Crazy, kind of goes all over. Citizen of the world, but currently living in Catalonia. Then we had Luca from Sweden. We had Lether from Basque, Spain. We had Kevin for Ireland, and then I was from the USA. Fun fact, there were 3 people from the US there. I was the only player. We almost completely capitalized the judges, but I was the only player from the US, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah, and ultimately, the UN team at the World Team Championship, 12th out of 22, which is actually not that bad for a team that I gotta assume practicing was relatively hard, because a lot of these teams had the benefit of everyone's in the same state or country or geographic region, so getting that practice in definitely, I would assume, is pretty hard. And even just planning, what teams you're going to put on the team. I assume for the UN team, you guys just kind of went with what teams you're most comfortable with, or was there a deeper selection choice involved in getting the 5 UN teams together?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So for the, I'll briefly touch on the learnings I took from the All Valley Team Tournament. I was also the team lead there for my P&W peeps. We went down, Sean, who won the Tacoma Open, and then Bean, who's like, blooded player. We went down there, and the things I took away is team comp is actually quite important. We ended up going for a 3-person team: Sanctifiers, Plague Marines, Blooded. I thought that was a very nice spread of teams because the high activation count models can be quite good if teams take too many low activation count teams. Since you can pick map, you can find maps where it's easy to mission later. That said, teams for the UN. So what we ended up doing was I asked each player to fill out a sheet where what would their top 5 teams be if they would take anything? Like, what do they feel comfortable playing? And so I'm looking at it right now. And so each of our 5 players have 5 teams that we could have picked. And then from there, we try to decide a good composition. And so could go into a little bit how we chose the composition. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun part here, because teams is kind of unexplored, and I'm sure there will be things that we can go in depth with, maybe the UK when we get some of the UK players on. But for the UN team, since it is a little bit more of a stranger's pick, I think there's some interesting things that maybe could come up when you're doing 3-person teams out on the West Coast or on the East Coast for different team tournaments when you're doing the mercenaries format. So I think it might be nice to just kind of think about what that thought process looks like, because it's probably useful even for teams who are on the newer end, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's a great way to think about it. I think it's relatively fun. Usually this can be a really nice topic of discussion. One thing I'll say, this is just my personal Get ready for the takes. I think team events are really fun. They're probably not the most competitive events simply because the goal in teams is to make uncompetitive games happen. And so in that sense, good team play means you often should be going into games that you should win or should lose, and being able to change those factors of like what team, what map, what mission. It's just not as a competitive kind of like mindset, or I would say not as competitive outset as a singles event where you're just going to get what you get and you have to always be there for yourself. The really great thing about a team event is you have everyone else that you're talking with. And composition is one of those things where you can start early, and the UN team, we could only really talk. You can never really be on a call at the same time. It's about like a 9 to 12 hour difference. So like, my like 1 p.m. is their 1 a.m. for a lot of my teammates. So it was very hard. I think we only ever had 2 actual phone discussions before we met. But that said, how we ended up going with it is we wanted to try to find a good mix, because this was also before elite and guard changes when we started thinking about it. We wanted a good mix, and we kind of had in our teams, we had a lot of good hits. We have some very strong teams like Nemesis Claw, Hyrotech, Chaos Colts, Blades of Cain, Legionary, Nemesis Claw, again for another player, Aquilons, and then like Sanctifiers, Blooded. I think it can be quite good in a team setting depending on who it's going into. And so there are a lot of good choices. There's a plethora of powerful teams that you might pick, but how do you select? And we decided to try to find themes. And so we kind of like eventually honed in on 3 themes.
The teams have a specific style, right? Like the 10 wide teams would be a style, or the 6-man teams or the elf teams. These are like stylistic choices. And then each one of those teams can kind of cover this kind of matchup. So, one common thing I heard at the World Team Championship, because everyone basically had Goremongers in the upper range, was that Goremongers famously very strong at making skew matchups. You want to play them against elves because you have the same number of operatives, and one single aspirant touches 2 elves and the game's over. So having those uncompetitive games and having those team selections definitely was one of those powerful choices. Sanctifiers came up a lot at the weekend. Hyrotech Circle came up a lot. And because in team formats you can, set some of your matchups, having a couple of the really powerful, really obnoxious teams was a good thing. Some teams went the line of, we're going to push to have more 50-50 matchups and then not do the skew thing, because if they do too many of the skews, they're not setting up their players for competitive games where they can be the better person. Yeah. I think, Spain Tertius mentioned this when I talked to them on the side, how they basically had all elves and a couple of the Space Marine teams, because they figured if they got into these weird lineups where, you're going to be lining up mono a mono, you think you're the better player, you should win the mirror match. So actually in one of the games at the World Team Championship, they had like the all mirror Spanish playoffs where they had 3 mirror matches and then 2 kind of, the throw matches. And it turned out that I think the Primus team at the time ended up winning more of the mirror matches. And that was a little bit of an upset at the time, but it's interesting hearing you talk about setting up these teams for the skew matches, because on the UN team, and probably for a lot of the teams, this is the framing that most people were using, because if you get a couple free matches, then you just have to send your best player into the hard matches to win some of those. So you can give your worst players a little bit of an edge, or your best players a really big edge. And one of the big points in the World Team Championship scoring is you actually want a large differential in your final game score so that you can actually get a win. So if you get a 1-point win, I think you don't get anything, and you have to get at least a 2-point delta, a 3-point delta, before you're able to score an actual World Team Championship point.
Yeah. Or sorry, you need to, across all of your teams, so you only need a 1-point win to score for your specific individual match, but your team all up needs to have a 3-point delta. So if you're only 2 points, like I don't know how far we went into the matchup, but like assume someone scores 20 and someone scores 22 in the matchup at WTC, that's considered a tie. You need the team to at least win by 3 points across all matchups. So it's relatively scary or it can be a big risk to do a bunch of 50-50 matchups because you can end up tying. And
Even
that's
if you're the better player, right? Because anyone could go, you could be the better player and your opponent could have a better dice, and it's always going to be a little bit of a risk. So if you're going to be the better player, you need to win by at least 3 points to really guarantee that your team gets value out of the aura of sending in your strongest player against their strongest player, which, ultimately did happen a bunch at the upper range of the brackets at the end. Because I think both the Spain Primus and UK1 versus Poland and Australia, both of them sent their team captains against, their other team captains, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah, that happened a couple times for us as well. So we were thinking about 3 themes, and we titled these themes. And one was good stuff. Spoiler, we just went with good stuff. But the other 2 themes were double elite. And the interesting thing about the pairing process is you can force one elite matchup if you take 2 elites. So imagine someone has something like, I don't know, Goremongers. And let's assume it's before the nerf and you think Nemesis Claw and Plague Marines are very good into Goremongers. The way that the pairing works in WTC is if you have 2 elites and you're just trying to seek out that Goremonger player, and that's like your only goal in the matchup process, you get to dictate a lot of the matchups because the other team must be hiding that. And so we called one theme our 2 elite no hiding theme, and then our last theme was Kroot. And the idea behind the Kroot matchup was in the WTC thing matchups, you ban missions. And we thought that Kroot, with some of their interesting play, if you got someone incredibly used to and on Kroot, you could start to use their mission play into low activation teams to run away on mission, and essentially even from like a higher tech player or maybe even one of the tougher matchups, you might be able to score a small win and then kind of stack your power teams, which might be your Brood Brothers, Sanctifiers, Goremongers somewhere else. And so that was the 3 themes we thought about. It was like, what do we think is just good / what do we know the best? Can we do this 2 elite thing? That one kind of fell off after the update with elites and guard and stuff like that. Plague Marine, thanks Sean. And then Kroot we decided against because our Kroot player thought that he might not be able to get as much time in on the team. And so we ended up going with, I thought was a pretty good mix and match. We ended up Sanctifiers for me, Tempest Aquilons for Kevin from Ireland. Then we had Lether on Nemesis Claw. Yeah, I'm remembering that, right? Right? No, he went on Legionaries. Sorry, yeah, Legionaries. And then we had Luca on Chaos Colts, and then Mateo on Hyrotech Circle. And so that gave us a pretty good skew. I really like Tempestus Aquilons because they can keep any matchup close. They may lose, they're only going to lose by little, and if they go against certain teams, they're going to win by a lot. So they're pretty good. Sanctifiers. All right, moving on. Chaos Colts, I think, are actually an incredibly interesting one because they play interesting skews. They're one of these teams where a lot of players haven't seen them. I think a really great player on Chaos Colts can just show people how it's done a lot of the time on the mid tables. Then people like, oh, that's how Chaos Colts are played. All right, I guess I lose. And then also they have so many bodies that it's hard for opponents to pull away into large number of wins. I think high model count teams, because of how kill up works, it's kind of hard to really outpace them in a team format. You might win, but hopefully the large activation teams will keep it relatively close. And then last was Hyrotech Circle, which is just a great team. So,
especially in the team format where you want to keep games close, the best team at keeping the kill grade down is probably going to be a team that was overrepresented. And I do think that they were basically taken by almost every single team in the format. I think Sanctifiers and Hyrotech Circle were the big winners going into the World Team Championship as far as perceived power level.
Yeah, I agree. Technically, the most selected team was Goremongers. I don't know if the statistics bear out the fact that they were taken so much, though. I know our team kind of skipped them, but I think after the Nemesis Claw, and Legionary or Plague Marine changes. I feel like maybe they don't have crazy skew losses, but just on the stats of WTC, I think they were overpicked if you compare their performance at the event, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's probably a stat show that me and Jason could take even more time digging into, but it turns out that after the World Team Championship, we've all got new things to go look at, and that's something that we have moved off of because those are the old TAC ops, and now people, if they want to prep for the World Team Championship, we're looking at the new TAC ops just because it's going to be a whole new world. Have you gotten a chance to noodle around with the new stuff at all?
Yes, I have. But real quick, I want to talk about what I thought was like just a real quick. But I think the most important thing about team is communication. So one thing we did at AVTT and then into WTC is we did debrief chats where everyone had 2 to 5 minutes to talk. How did they like their mission? How did they like their map? What do they want to see? And keeping that idea of the open communication as people learn more, because you're always constantly learning about Kill Team. That was really important. And then also, I think the best thing about team events is sharing the experience with all the players. Like, I think a mistake what you might make is you just play a game, you like peace out, you come back, you play a game. I think like if you stay with the team, you try to keep the spirits high. One thing we did on our team was, so I was traveling from the US and we were all given flags. It's like, okay, I can't take the flag back. Whoever has like the best win rate at the end, you keep the UN flag. So like, regardless of what our rate goes to, no matter where we place, even we're in last, there's like some kind of fun thing keeping us invested in the games. But I think that's what makes the team format awesome, is the people you play with, and a big part of that is just keeping everyone talking and keeping the vibes good.
Yeah, and actually, that's post World Team Championship and post AVTT. What was the team practice like for both the AVTT and the WTC teams tournament? Just because I got to assume TTS came into play for the broad thing for WTC, or did you guys have, regimented days where you guys would play games against your local play partners and then meet up afterwards and talk about kind of your findings? What was the practice structure like, and how did it feel different between the two sets of team tournaments?
Yeah, I think for the AVTT, we just know each other quite a bit, and we would play a lot of practice games. And we just always play practice games versus each other as is. So that may be like bumped up a little bit before the event. And we would try different things. I was pretty much on Sanctifiers because that was great. Brandon Bean was on Blooded because that's what he's going to play every time. And then Sean was the one who we were like pinging around. What are we going to do? How are we going to go? And we just decided to do a counter Goremonger pick. And at the time, the Plague Ring and the Goremonger matchup was just ridiculous before the changes. So, yeah. And then for the UN practice, I think I got one game in versus one of my team members over the course of 2 months. And it was on TTS and it was at 4 a.m. And so it was, I think, Mateo on Hyrotech just walking through the Hyrotech Sanctifier matchup. But that's all. Unfortunately, we just didn't get as much time there. But we did talk a lot, and we talked about strategy. And we also did a big sheet where we tried to figure out, what do you want your team to go into? Here are all the kill teams we know that are going. Just rate 1 to 5 into the dark, open. Tell me how you feeling. 5, you're feeling really good. 1, you're feeling like you're going to lose 80% of the time. And so that was interesting because it kind of helped inform. And we did that for both of those. And as a team captain, making picks in the moment, reviewing that stuff was super, super helpful, because I just like kind of generally remembered what all of my team members wanted to see, what they didn't want to see. And that made matchups really, really good. I think I was pretty happy. In my estimate, I think we won 3 to 4 of our pairings. We tied two or three, and I think we maybe lost one pairing. Like one pairing I felt relatively bad about, but like our first game was versus Spain Tertius or whatever. And I thought our pairings were like perfect. I was like, oh my God, I got exactly what I wanted. And that's because like I knew which team wanted to face what. That said, I think we ended up losing by a lot. But, the pairing went well. That went how I wanted it.
Yeah, actually, we could dig into that real quick, just because I think that's an interesting way to talk about this specific pairing process. So World Team Championships, there's basically like an offering process where you submit a team to the overall spread, and then your opponents can apply an opponent, and then the person who gets the opponent picks, I think, the mission. Basically, there's like 4 factors that come into play. You can remove some missions from the overall mission pool, and then someone can find the matchup, and then the opponent will pick the board, and then you'll pick the mission, I think, or all the missions are assigned to the boards first, and then so
you pick missions as you go. So like you put out a team, then you pick what team's going to go versus it. The person who puts out the team, the other person, the first team, they pick the map, then the person picks the mission. So you're either picking mission or map. That's the thing that matters. You're either picking mission or map along with you.
This is an example of a spot where you thought you did a good job on pairings, and this is against Hispania Tertius, which, for anyone who doesn't know, that's kind of like the famous Spanish players. I think off the top of my head, it's Ace, Hava, Carlos, and Ace and Carlos have both been to the World Championships twice. Lazarus is famous on the internet as an internet person who of some repute, and he was on Brew Brothers. So like this is kind of who would have been I think they were Primus last year. This year they're Tertius, and you were playing against them with the UN team. Looking at the final pairings, I see Goremongers versus Chaos Cults. I see Blades of King.
You guys, I'm jumping in with a quick advertisement. If you are listening to this and you're planning to go to the New York Open and you haven't bought your tickets already, do it now. Log in right now. We've got a link in the description of the show notes, and get your tickets to the New York Open, and we'll see you there. Same thing for the Renegade Open. New York Open is coming up October 18th weekend, and November 22nd is the weekend of Renegade Open in Minnesota. Grab your tickets. See you there.
Versus Legionary. I see Phobos versus Aquilons, and I see Void Dancer Troop versus Hardtech, and then I see Brood Brothers versus Sanctifiers. So which one of these 5 pairings did you think you guys were supposed to win? So Goremongers, Chaos Cults, were you guys supposed to win or lose that one?
I think that one is one of the best ways we can deal with Goremongers, where it doesn't go into me to eat how I ended up thinking about a lot of this is I thought like I acted as both a shield and sword. I was like, okay, if we're going to do well, I'm going to try to eat.
Sanctifiers can take a lot of the weird matchups because they are so hard to kill, and they can also push into the weak matchups and really skew the score just because they can move so much.
Right, exactly. And so obviously I could always take a Goremonger, and I think that's okay. But one of the only tools on our team to be able to keep it close or maybe come out with a win is the Legionary matchup or the Chaos Cult matchup. And so I thought on this pair, I really liked the Chaos Cult matchup into Goremongers, as I think it's one of the only matchups in this whole round that would be good for Chaos Cults or even keep it close. I think Brood Brothers is quite bad. I think Blades of Cain, especially piloted by Ace, I think that would have probably not been great for our Chaos Cult buddy.
Cheap fodder for the Chaos Cult player, especially if the Blades of Cain goes a little bit slow. And the Blades of Cain, piloted against Legionary. So this was a matchup that you guys thought was going to be in your favor. Legionary have the -1 to hit bubble in melee. So Blades of Cain's Howling Banshees basically always doing a dice roll when they go in. Mm-hmm. Your Legionaries can generally take a hit and, wrecking ball your way through. So that was a matchup that you guys were expecting to go well, or theoretically could go well.
Exactly. And this one is one of the best ways we can deal with Ace on Blades of Cain.
Turn into a little bit.
I don't have many options.
Your big guys can go manage him. So that means that,
again, Sanctifiers could come in.
Phobos Strike Team Aquilons, that was supposed to be a good one.
That was supposed to be. I think on paper that's a great win because we also got the Aquilon player Kevin a really good map. And so good map, good mission. I think the mission was like early scoring to out-activate the Phobos player. And then also, Aquilon's given enough time on, I think it was a short edge or a long board. I think that was like one of our better pairings.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Void Dancer Troop, Higher Tech Circle.
Yeah, this one was a wash, but it was one of the ways to deal with Void Dancers that I felt like pretty good about. I think Hyrotech has like a pretty good. That one's a toss up, and so I'm okay with taking a toss up as maybe the worst of the pairings, but still like a nice game.
And then Brood Brothers versus you on Sanctifiers, which was the matchup that I think all of the Brood Brothers were there to do. From what I remember at World Team Championship, I talked to a bunch of people on Brood Brothers, a bunch of people on Sanctifiers, and basically all the Brood Brothers players were the Sanctifiers, nail on the cross, because they have the Magus who just strips right through the 8 wound marker, especially when you -1 APL someone and then just mind blast them into oblivion. So that was a matchup that you were slated to lose, but I guess running back on these matchups, Brood Brothers versus Sanctifiers, you managed to take the win. And then Void Dancer Troop versus Hyrotech Circle, you actually took the win. So these were your 2 matchups where these are your bad matchups or your toss-up matchups. And then the 3 that you were, or the 2 that you were hoping to be good matchups, Tempestus Aquilons Phobos and Legionary Blades, didn't end up panning out that way. And then Chaos Cults versus Goremongers ended up being just a abject disaster from looking at the final score.
Yeah. And I mean,
it's a hard fought
Fade
game.
Tertius has some amazing players, and dice do come in. But yeah, I was pretty excited about those matchups. I thought the Brood Brothers. Another thing, which was an interesting one, and this actually came up in both events. Here, I had myself winning into the Brood Brothers player most of the time, only because the other thing, I gave myself kind of like 3 roles on the team: Sword, Shield, and then also all of the Bunda maps. So I had played about 9 games on the WTC only maps. And so I was relatively well versed in those maps in a way that I didn't think a lot of other players were. And so the majority of my maps, I'd be like, what can't my team deal with? All right, we're going to the Bunda board. And I'm going to like play them on that.
Yeah, for players who don't know, the Bandua boards were boards that were designed for last year's WTC. They were kind of an adjusted MDF version of Alcarius. Me and Jason, we had a map pack that came out ways back before the WTC. And ultimately, I think on this edition, they still work fine, but they will feel like far more open movement boards. Like they're far more permissive on movement for melee and for shooting or whatever. But you also just don't have cover when you get cut. Like there's not really room to get extra cover on an engage model, but you also get the benefit of just like clean cover lines, which is nice.
Real nice.
And
real nice.
For Sanctifiers it's great because you're like, I just want to be able to push up, and now I have all the space to run around the board, my 25mm bases, cruise right through all the random gaps, and you can get other people trapped. I mean, honestly, in this matchup you were against Brood Brothers, so it didn't really matter.
Yeah. No, the Bunda maps are really interesting. They also have open vantage is very interesting in this edition. Like the Volcus vantage is very different than normal Octarius rune vantage, only because like there are a lot of weird rules with like heavy on the second floor of vantage, which is what you normally don't see in a lot of the other stuff. And so there's also there's no big tower, so like just the first level vantage is good. If someone can't get up to vantage, you're going to be on conceal. And so lead the procession on a ladder up onto vantage when someone doesn't have an ability to get onto vantage and fire that turn is like a crazy flex, which is really interesting for Sanctifiers, specifically on the Bunda maps. Anyways, a lot of little tricks like that. And so this also happened in AVTT, where we had a lot of maps that we had like one open, one
one open, one in the dark,
one
and then there was like one campaign board, which is like, the board's gonna be, it's gonna look nice, but that meant that there's always this one board that's like this beta decima style like eye roll for the players, which is not a bad thing. This is just a thing that happens when people have these boards that are the non-GW, a little bit more off-kilter boards. It means that you have to work a lot more with your opponent to figure out like what is or is not going to be in range. I guess in this sense, the Bandua boards are really nice. I'm pretty sure that there are other regions that have to manage stuff like this. Beta Decima would be another spot where you would have to talk up front to make sure everyone's on the same page before you get into it. So this is an example of something that you thought lined up pretty well. What was the round where you thought the team pairing ended up kind of collapsing in on itself? Just so we can have a different idea of what that felt like, because I think it's kind of
I believe
interesting.
that
It's not really
was
something that comes up.
Yeah, I think that was the second to last. I think that's on Germany Kimura, I think.
All right, let me pull it up real quick.
If I'm recalling it correctly.
Yep, we got the UN team versus Germany Kamara. And this is your example of a pairing process that you felt like kind of went off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, I believe
So
so.
the first pairing was Legionaries versus Blades of Cain, and you thought that
Mhm.
this was going to be, I assume the first time we talked about this, you thought it was good. So this remains good. And then the
Mhm.
second pairing was Higher-Tech Circle Scout Squad.
I'm so sorry. I think it's the match before this. I think it's
Okay.
into the
I
T1
was about
or
to say, we're
by.
two in, and these
Sorry.
both seem like good
Yeah.
matchups.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think this was I think this was the one.
Okay, so looking at that one, this is against the French Team 1 or by.
Yeah.
Also hopping in again to let you know that Crossfire Games is super sick. The battle box is amazing, and you can order one using the link in the show notes.
All right, so this is an example of a pairing process where you felt like it kind of went off the rails. So we had Higher-Tech Circle versus Tempestus Aquilons. Was this supposed to be a win or a loss?
That is a very close game. I think it's very technically favored for higher tech most of the time, but you don't want to spend such a power team on such a close match, in my opinion. And so I think they're doing a really good job defending our higher tech player on this matchup.
Yeah, and then we got the higher tech player versus Pathfinders, which ended up, was this supposed to be a good or bad match? Because, knowing how I feel when I play that matchup, I just feel like Pathfinders, it's rough against anything that comes back to life.
Yeah, for Pathfinders. Yeah, I thought this one, the only problem with this one is I think Mateo had never or only once played Pathfinders and only in a practice game. And so if you know all the Pathfinders silliness, I think you just get rolled a lot of the time. And so I thought this was rough because I wanted to try to find someone who had played Pathfinders before. So in this one, ended up being a nice win for Mateo here, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a pretty solid win.
Yeah, my assumption was, assuming this Pathfinder player had a pretty good breadth of experience, unless they were going into someone who had seen it before. And I think the only person who had seen the alpha, because that's specifically what I talked, I was like, has anyone seen the Pathfinder alpha while we were pairing? And everyone's like, no, I don't know what it is. They can shoot twice or something. I was like, okay, well, if I don't get Pathfinder, then we're probably going to lose that. So this was like a failure in pairing for me, even though the result was good.
I see. Okay, and the next round was Nemesis Claw versus Sanctifiers.
I thought that was maybe our only good pairing in my own mind. I think this was good, but the problem here is I can probably take a lot of these other matchups.
Yeah, Sanctifiers Sanctifiers were often paired against Higher Tech Circle, and you could definitely beat a Pathfinders player. So this was a matchup where you felt like your Sanctifiers pick was going into kind of like a low expected value opponent, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think they wanted this matchup more than I did. I think that, I had a much higher win here, but then I ended up rolling ones on my last attack. But getting through that trauma, I think that this can blunt my score a lot, possibly. And also, I think the Nemesis Claw player, into Aquilons, I feel great about that. Into Chaos Colts, I think we're okay. There are other teams that could deal with this opponent easy, and I'm just eating something I don't need to, I think, in this matchup.
Because you could be playing against, Farstalker Kinban against Chaos Colt, which was the only match of this spread that your team ended up losing. And that would have been, probably like a 20-0, just because there's no way a Farstalker Kinban player is going to realistically kill the Sanctifiers at all.
No. Yeah. Exactly.
So this fourth pairing is Farstalker Kinban versus Chaos Cult. This is also one where you were was this one that you guys were expecting to be good?
No. This was one of the only, I think this might be the only real problem for our Chaos Cult player. I like him into almost every other possible one, and so this felt rough to me.
Yeah. Because the Chaos Cults can overrun the Raveners by getting big enough where when the Raveners come out, they're not going to do anything important. The Nemesis Claw, you've got a fair shot. Pathfinders, you're definitely going to roll. And then a Higher Tech Circle, maybe, who knows, but Far Circuit men have the ability to get up in your face really early and go trim all your small guys with the 2 hounds early on.
And then also you have to like pair
the
for the player as well. And so a big one here is I think we talked about it, and I think Luca had told me he didn't know the Far Stalker Kinban matchup. And so I know it's like one of the worst possible matchups here, and he doesn't know it. And so finding this pairing is just bad for us. It's just bad for us.
Yeah. And then the last one was Raveners versus Legionary, where it is kind of a little dicey, but it turned out that the Legionary player ended up running away with this one, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, gosh damn. Yeah, Lether did a great job there. Kind of saving the day. I mean, we end up pretty well here all in all. But again, I think this is almost like my pairing into Nemesis Claw. I think the Raveners were, in my opinion, so the Tempestus Aquilon Ravener matchup is absolutely insane depending on the mission, and is so incredibly in the Aquilon favor that if we don't find that feels pretty rough. And then I also think the Aquilon Nemesis Claw matchup is really good for our Tempestus player as well. And so the fact they go into Hyrotech, it's like, yeah, they can win, but again, they're probably blunting. And so just generally, our high value teams or the matchups where I think we can run away with, I'm not able to find. Doesn't influence the what do you call it?
It did
Win or
influence the
lose
final
here.
end result, because you did end up winning this one. Notably, I suppose, as far as like the overall bracket spread. By the time you're in your 5th round, the UN team was 1-3. So perhaps this is a skill thing where you're matching up into a team base that is kind of in the same base. So even though you feel like those pairings aren't that great, you ended up doing pretty well. And that's hats off to your team for finding a way out through all the chaos.
Yeah, thanks.
What are we talked a lot about the World Team Championship where you were playing with strangers, not really strangers, but they're probably, they were definitely strangers in comparison to the
internet friends. Yeah.
Internet friends, now real friends, compared to the 3-person teams of the All Valley Team Tournament. What do you feel like maybe is there anything that you could bring over from the 5-man teams tournament, or is there anything that you could have brought over from the 3-man teams tournament? Like, what was the interchange of team style ideas between the 2 tournaments?
I mean, I think so much of it is mindset. So we end up going like 3-1 or something, and we, end up taking quite a few losses in the beginning. I think we go versus the strongest team, though technically they don't end up winning. Spain Tertius was my big boogeyman on my little punch card. And so that
pretty good.
Yeah, that was pretty rough. But I think just keeping a positive attitude and communication, it's so important. Even though you might only have 15-minute between rounds, check in with people, and she checking in how they thought their match went, what they ended up learning, how are they feeling, and then also just having everyone contribute as a group to the discussion. I think that's a lot better. Some things I saw at and I don't know, I mean, I was pretty busy. This is what I perceived out of my periphery, was a lot of teams had like coaches or like people trying to or captains trying to be very meticulous about who did what. But I think trying to make a situation which everyone is just sharing information and you're trying to get all of the context out there for what each person is experiencing so you can make the best decisions together. I think that's really important. And along with that comes a great kind of camaraderie that I don't think you get in the like single player kind of games. And so I'd say we did a little bit of that in the All Valley Team Tournament. It became even more important working with people for like the first time, and also having to get like info dumps from 5 people. And we have to go over, how'd you think about your map? How'd you think about your mission? And what'd you think about your pairing? Do you want to be a shield? Do you want to be a sword? And so like, you're learning things like, oh, this player really wants wide maps, regardless of it's into the dark or open. This player really wants into the dark maps, but not these specific 2. The Bunda maps are working out for like these players, not working out for those players. And the more little details you can share, and as you react on the day and learning, I think that's pretty darn important. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And then also going in and checking with the team, like team captains were the only one at WTC that could go around the tables and talk and be like, hey, you need to win more. Hey, don't worry about winning too much. Hey, yes, you're losing, but only lose by a little. And so no other player could talk in between each other. And there were some rules about what you could talk about, what you couldn't talk about. That's boring. Won't get into that. But doing that, I think 3 to 4 times every game was super important as well.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the cooler things on being a captain or coach, because this was something that coaches at the World Team Championships were specifically allowed to do, is that you could check in on the game and see if your player was winning or losing and by how much. And then they could take that information and process it on their own and then be able to tell your different teammates like, hey, if you're winning, don't push it. I saw one funny interaction in a Spanish game where a player really wanted to go in for a fancy play, and he looked at his coach and he's like, can I do this? And the coach was like, you don't have to do this, but if you want to, you can. And then he looked back at the coach, they looked at his opponent, and then passed with his model, boldly passed to make sure the team had a strong position. I thought that was very funny. And that's not something that you would ever get in a singles game.
No.
And I suppose, in a 3-man All Valley team tournament where I don't know what the table talk situation was like. That was something that I think is kind of specific to the World Team Championship, but maybe, that's not the case. I don't know how much cross table talk there is at the All Valley Team Tournament off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Certainly when I went, I don't really remember talking to my teammates all that much about that sort of stuff, but I was there 2 years ago.
Yeah, fair. For the All Valley Team Tournament, I think the only thing that really the cross table talk, because it only mattered if you won or lost. 1-loss tie, and so like the amount didn't really matter as much. I will say once your two your two buddies have won or lost, you just like, all right, well, we'll just wrap this up here. It's like the rest of the game doesn't really matter. You get to like kind of take a break, take a chill pill, kind of like get ready for the next one, which is kind of nice. When like, okay, yeah, we're like mid turn 3, but none of this matters, so let's roll some dice. I don't know, have a drink or whatever.
Yeah, the unique things that happen at team tournaments. And, we've had another player on here who talked about the 40K team tournament vibes, and there's a lot of this camaraderie that you develop as a scene, but I suppose for smaller regions that don't have as many players to interact with, getting out to some of these doubles or triples, or even, going to the World Team Championship as a group is going to be a big thing that can really like bind a group of players together.
It's also crazy how much you might improve. I think especially if you're not a player who plays all the time. Imagine you go to a team tournament and you have to explain like 3 reasons why you won or lost a game immediately after it's played to people who weren't actually there. That's a lot of cat in that shot there, Jake.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's like a really good coaching moment. And it's a really good learning moment because you're sharing the experience with people and they can give feedback and you can share your thoughts and everyone's kind of invested. And you're not just, you obviously you can talk to your opponent after the game. Hey, what do you think went wrong? What do you think happened here? Do you think like one thing I usually like to do with my opponents if they're feeling open to it is like, what's the smallest change that could have been made in the game we played to change the outcome of the match? Like if this had happened, would that have changed? Let's find the smallest thing.
Because sometimes it really is the smallest thing. I think players get really caught up on dice rolls or the pairing or, the final big play, the final thing that everyone remembers. But the game could have been won or lost, multiple activations ago, or your opponent could have just been holding back the whole time. So being able to really hone in on specific choices or mistakes or dice failures rather than my dice generically were bad is actually one of the big ways that you level up. We just had Taz on here to talk about threat management, staging threats. That's something that in the context of a team tournament, when you're in a game, you're like, oh man, I lost this game. I don't know why. If one of your teammates saw it, they could really point out like, this exact moment when you chose to take A and not B, that's when you lost the game. Even though you had bad dice rolls, for 3 more activations after that, that first play actually tilted you off into a timeline that was not going to get you a win. So being able to look through those games with friends and even during practice, I think that's actually a spot that in close practice for these team tournaments, you're going to be more likely to build up that muscle. Because I think if you just go to tournaments as a solo player, you're oftentimes not going to be working on the muscle that's what mistakes do I make? One of the things I do in every game is I'm trying to find my 3 mistakes because that way I can think about them and then internalize them. And when I play the next game, I'll try not to make those mistakes. And when you're playing and setting up for team tournaments and you talk with your friends, or you play a game against someone else and your friend watches over TTS or in real life, that's one of those moments where you can really peel apart a couple layers and talk about specific decisions and why we make them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's like a big one. Talking to your opponent after, and then like you said, sharing with your team. That's just a unique kind of experience of recalling a game and trying to uh it's one thing to talk to a player that you're playing the game with. It's another thing to relay the information of the game immediately after it happened to people who maybe weren't present. And so it makes you think about the game in a completely different way, makes you recall it in a different way. And it can kind of like crystallize some of your thoughts. So I think that was really cool.
Do you have any good examples of, something that crystallized for you when you were practicing for AVTT or at the World Team Championship when you were talking with your compadres?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things was like this. I have like a working theory where teams that out activate on certain missions, though we just changed them all. I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. On certain missions, they always keep the game super close. Like if you're just out activating on like loot or something and the initiatives like headed your way, or you get like an okay number of initiatives throughout the game, it's very hard to not get a live game almost regardless of whatever the other team is. And so being able to like surf that idea of like, hey, we're going to the end no matter what happens here and we're keeping it close is a little different than going all in, which I think sometimes is like a really interesting kind of gambit that like you might play if you're doing like 8 versus 8 or like lower model count games, is like in these like 10 versus 8 and below. There's this thing where you can always opt to play for turn 4. We're just like, okay, we're going to turn 4. All right, sure. I'm down at a little bit of tempo. We're deciding the game on turn 4. And you do that through simply like keeping the mission very, very much alive and then trying to be like, yeah, you're ahead by 1 on kill up. But if we just keep that state and I like retreat back and I like mission up, then we're deciding the game on turn 4. And dice can go crazy, and they're only going to go crazy on turn 4 because I'm like deciding that all of the action is happening then. And so that's like an interesting thing that we were talking about through AVTT, and I kind of tried to bring into the
World Team Championship.
Yeah, the World Team Championship.
Especially on Sanctifiers, because Sanctifiers are a great team at trying to keep things close. One, because defensively it's very hard to actually remove an operative from the game.
Sure.
And then 2, because you're perceived as so powerful. When you let go of the tempo, your opponent might also take that same moment of like, oh man, I get some time to go score this extra point while you're retreating back. And also, you can lead the procession away from your opponent, and then suddenly you've balled up and your opponent is in a weird spot.
Yeah.
Although
it's also like it's also like as Phobos, let's imagine, right? Like as Phobos, how are you winning by 5 into Aquilons if that Aquilon player is just like, we're playing for turn 4 and like we're gonna keep it close until turn 4. Like you might be in a winning position, maybe, but like you're in a winning position, you're not in a dominating position because they still have so many resources that they can just keep until later. And so that was a really interesting thing. I think 2 or 3 times throughout WTC, I was like, hey, I think they had too many teams with too few models. And so like their wins, if you just keep it close and you just play for later, if you think you're losing, okay, cool. You'll keep it within 3 points, and then the ones we win will win. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting one. It's like an idea I didn't even have that as an idea until playing a little bit at AVTT, and then definitely through WTC is something I was just noticing. Because normally it doesn't matter. Normally, if you're in singles, you're like, oh, you lose, who cares? But like in this format where you can win by a little, lose by a little, this like, oh, just bring a bunch of teams with 10 plus operatives, and like, sure, you might win, but how much you can win by? You gonna win by a lot? I don't think so.
I think that was
Yeah.
kind of what the Spain Tertius was trying to go for. I think when I talked to, Ace on the side, he mentioned that he wanted to have as many of the matchups be, player skill matchups. And I think the idea is you could keep it close in every other situation with player skill being the thing
Yeah.
that is evening you out. Like player comfort on a team plus player skill against someone who is just power gaming. You probably still have a fair chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. You doing it?
So, we're talking about WTC, AVTT, all of this. It's old news. It's all played on the old stuff. We're throwing all that away. The next AVTT
There's no
is going
orb.
to be on glorious approved ops 2025, where we're going to be gazing upon the orb for hours upon hours. So, what are your hot takes for the new stuff coming in?
All right. Hey, we're doing hot takes. Yes, we're a hot take, so I'm not gonna cool this take off anymore, which is Death Watch D tier. And that team's gonna be menace at mid tables, but without any kind of movement out of activation. Everything is incredibly well like on the table. And so I think verse first the gatekeeping teams without any fun tricks out of activation for movement is going to be real rough. And now I assume Jason's blood vessel is going to pop and he's going to tell me how wrong I am. But that is my that is my hottest take.
Look, I wouldn't go all the way down to D tier, but I would definitely say very soundly in like C tier. They don't have like a whole lot of dice reliability. Just like they don't. I mean, like the plasma gunner, for example, is pretty good, but not being able to shoot twice is just like if you get cooked on one bad dice roll, you're kind of just done. I mean, they have a lot of that kind of stuff going on, and so I think I fully agree. They're going to bully people on like the mid tables, the lower tables, but like they're not going to win anything big very often. Maybe there'll be a couple players like winning locals and stuff like that, but big events, I think they're going to get slapped around, and it's going to be a rough time for Deathwatch at the moment.
Yeah, that's actually kind of panned out so far on like the earliest of the early stats shows, where Canoptic Circle is like up at like the 59% and Deathwatch are down to 45%. We'll see if, the week of this podcast is a little different. Catch us on Patreon if you want to find out. But Deathwatch, that 5 operative, tends to be a little hard, but maybe just run up to the midline and don't play the back line. You don't need it. Just go route your opponent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Feed the bite.
And then I think Tomb World is just ITD in slow motion. I don't know. That's how it's feeling to me right now. I have only gotten a chance to play on 2 of the maps, so I'm a newbie. I'm a fledgling Tomb World player, but it seems like Into the Dark, but we're playing through Jello or something.
Yeah, it's crazy how much the 2 AP tax on those breachable walls ends up slowing things down so much. Although, notably, this is a spot for all of your 2 APL or 2 Pierce operatives or Piercing crits 2 in the case of the Geomancer, which is part of the reason why the Geomancer is breaking the game so hard, because 4 APL with the 2 walls in the way really does mess with people.
Okay, one thing I
Brutal.
want.
Wait. Is it not the same action to shoot a wall and then breach a wall?
It is the same. You can't shoot, but you can definitely blow 2 walls and then open up the way for someone else to go hand.
But I thought you couldn't perform how do you get around the action restriction?
Breach is a separate action from open door, so you can like breach, then move, and then open a door, which is not a thing that anyone's allowed to do.
Got it. Oh,
now that the 2 doors are open, your canoptic dudes can just float through and go nuke something.
Heck yeah.
And then the other one teleports through the 2 walls and nukes the other thing.
Yeah, okay, another hot take. This one's probably even spicier. Get ready. I don't think people are ready for this. Healing 15 D3 might be a few too many D3 in a turn. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking crazy pills.
Got nerfed already, and that was totally unacceptable. And now that we have the ability to do at least 9 D3 in one turning point, that's not enough. We gotta remove it, right?
Especially with all these
I remember my last
actually use it.
Yeah, that's the crazy part is you have a nice 21 wound pool, 3-up save, might be having rerolls on saves with access to just a scratch. Cool. Well, at least there's nothing that would be hard to kill that I could actually use my healing on. Then it'd be bad. Then it'd be real bad.
So you're just
Ugh.
supposed to shoot them, soften them up, and then send your melee guy in to finish it with
Ugh.
-1 movement and -1 damage. It's totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or what you're really supposed to do, you just get them to pop all their strat ploys and then you run away from them for a turn, and then go get them after their three CP turn is done.
Let them win the mission. I never thought about. You know what? You're totally right. Actually, this is totally fine. I mean, they're an incredibly fun team to play. I will say, just real quick, my last game at WTC, it was my only loss in the team rounds, was into Hyrotech. And it was because I failed some rolls into my last Hyrotech player. I failed to do damage, and then Living Metal kicked in, and I was telling my friends back home, like, I was doing pretty good, and they healed 21 wounds over the course of a game, and like, how do you come back from that 21 wounds? Unfortunately, I couldn't do it after that. And I'm just like looking at Canoptic, and I'm like, I feel like 20 wounds is a normal Tuesday for a Canoptic Circle player. I don't know. It seems doable if you have like the equipment where you're coming, and then let alone if you count the resurrecting the small mooks as healing, then you're hitting 21 wounds every single game, actually. Actually, exactly, right? Because they're always assuming you kill one on turning point too. Ugh.
Certainly a team with a big ablative wound pool.
Yeah. But I think
following along with the mega elites that have come before them and with them now, in that any one single shooting action is probably not going to kill you, and then suddenly you're healing and running away with it.
Yeah. Incredibly fun mechanic, though. I think the Matrix mechanic is awesome. I think the fact that I have had a mediocre hate relationship with Hyrotech Circle. Just as they're designed, I think they lead to a lot of problems for both player and opponent. I think it's just, I don't enjoy the kind of games that the Hyrotech Circle design makes, but that's an opinion of one. I think regardless, Canoptek Circle games are more interesting, more fun, more dynamic. So I like the new direction the robots are going in terms of like the design and the mechanics. I think those are super rad.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think Hyrotech Circle, if the other Cryptex were a little bit more interesting, but we basically just get Chronomancer playstyle, and it's kind of like linear, and there's not actually a lot of room. If it was, you take a Psychomancer and suddenly the death marks become a little bit more powerful, and then you get to see a little bit of variability, I think that would be nice. But as is right now, Hyrotech Circle have been basically the Chronomancer show for the entirety of their runtime, with a brief window where Psychomancers were playable, and then the Technomancer was taken out back and thrown onto the Canoptic Circle's kill team stat sheet as they were getting buffed. So, if there was going to be a quick nerf that happened on Canoptic Circle, I could see them going in line with the Technomancer stuff, just removing that 3d3, but time will tell on that.
Yeah.
How's the Pacific Northwest kind of taking in the new sets of changes? Any big tournaments coming up?
Yeah, well, we obviously have CritCon coming up at the end of next month. I'm very excited for that one. I am also going to be streaming that, so you'll find that on Twitch. Hopefully, this will be our first big stream from the Pacific Northwest. I'm very excited. We'll have team games on Friday, so that's like doubles. So big board, 2 teams. No idea how we'll film that. I'll figure it out. And then after that, we'll have 2 days. I believe it's 7 or 8 rounds of singles, so that should be super fun. I think we have 2 golden tickets to give out, so that should be pretty rad. See who gets them. Aside from that, we have monthlies. The first monthly coming up with the new rules is this Sunday, and so we'll see how it goes. I will say, I think our local TO Bean, he does a lot of the stuff over here. I think he's saying that he's gonna hold the healing to once per round for Canop deck. So over here, we're going to be filthy cheaters, and we're going to be playing it as only one 3D3 healing from the health bot. At least for our first, big 16-player tournament. Not sure about what the crit con is going to look like though.
Go in the realm of the fan patch to help deal with some of the more annoying parts of the game, huh?
Yeah, right, exactly. And then I think the approved ops, TAC ops are really interesting. How have y'all been enjoying them? I thought my first thought was Seek and Destroy was really good, and I'm reevaluating that. And then my second thought was Infiltration was not so great. I'm also reevaluating that. It seems playable in like the kind of ways that I didn't quite think. But yeah, I don't know. What have y'all seen? Have you gotten any games in for the 2025 ops?
Yeah.
I've played 3 games now. Jason has put on a couple games onto our YouTube, and we did our early review. I think we identified that Infiltration is basically the best it's looked in, the entirety of the 4 years. All 3 of them look like they're playable. Some teams have a lot more room to play with them. Raveners on installed device is basically guaranteed to touch all 3 objectives, and that's something that probably was not the case before. So there's definitely a lot of that sort of stuff floating around. And then Seek and Destroy is kind of linear as far as what you're allowed to do, and it also is capped now that there's 5 operative teams floating around. So you do need to really pay attention when you select the TAC ops. So I think I had the idea of recon on some of these wider teams, like mark enemy movements is pretty good. If you're playing Kroot or Pathfinder, you just sit in the back, you mark your opponent, you watch them kind of squirm around, and then send a dog in to go look at them. Or mandrakes, God forbid. So I'm looking forward to it. I need to play it a little bit more. I've probably got a game this coming Thursday, or this past Thursday by the time this podcast comes out.
Yeah, I've had a few games. It is nice and fresh. Lots of cool stuff there. Reboot is maybe my favorite mission. It's number 9. That's the one where you pick a number, and then if you pick the same one, that objective is dead, and if you don't pick the same one, then the other one is dead, and that's just like madness. It's and then like the rest of the mission is pretty simple after that. So I mean, it's kind of fun. It's kind of simple. I'm a huge fan of that one. And then also I've been entering my Mandrakes era, which I had my first game with Mandrakes today, playing against my friend's Legionary, and it was a blast. I had some hot dice, which was a really good way to be introduced to a new team. And it was basically just the threat range of Mandrakes is insane. And if you can trap a single model and the only threat that you put forward, you guarantee that you go first using the Dirge Maw. And then you just like trap and bully and isolate a single target and then missile through walls and then like dash at the end of the activation so that you 12-inch charge multiple times per turn. You can pretty much guarantee that you will never get hit first. So you just cruise missile 9 spooky elves into your enemy until you maybe win the game.
Yeah, right. I think that last one, that second to last one, maybe with the game.
Yes, because you could just lose on dice. But it really is, I think, super aggressive Mandrakes is fun and interesting. With the TAC ops, the first one I've been noodling around with is the Steal Intel, Gather Intel, or whatever. It's the Infiltration one that's kind of like Confirm Kill. So you kill someone, they drop a token, and then you pick it up, and you want to hold it at the end of the game. The first time I tried it, I scored 4, and it's decent. Or no, I scored 3, and I saw the path to 4 being easy.
I think 4 kind of fun. Is the plan now. I think 5 is. I don't know. Only 2 games in, but I think 5 is winning, and I think 4 is what you have to expect to not be losing. I'm not quite sure yet.
The goal seemed to be to trim the overall spread on TAC ops down to 3 to 5, but any team that can have a clean line to get 6, like I said, install device with Raveners where you just run over to your opponent's back line and drop it. That's going to be really powerful. So having those plans in mind is really important, but it's going to be at least not as easy as we're going to plant beacons or we're going to confirm kills. and we're not going to play take ground. So at least the spread of, what's valuable, I think looks a little bit wider. And especially if the goal is 5, definitely in range for more teams that have room to play the game. And that's what I'm excited for.
Yeah, I agree.
And the first week of stats on the Patreon show, it does look like it's going okay. A couple big losers, but, Canoptic Circle did pretty well. But overall, a lot more 45-55s than, maybe some of the past weeks on 400 players.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty dope. I also thought the biggest change, in my opinion, and this is like a change in design philosophy that I thought was kind of interesting. There are no more terrain-based scoring tac ops, which I thought was very interesting because they obviously didn't want terrain placement to matter for tac op stuff. I thought that was I just thought it was an interesting change. I was like, oh, wow, there's like nothing based on where things are on the board other than the actual kill zone measurements.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of a nod towards the actual map layouts being a little fuzzy on Kill Team. When you look at 40K, they have those exact layouts where now they measure everything out. Kill Team actually doesn't have those, and anytime that I've talked to anyone that's related to the tournament structure, they've told me, the measurements are supposed to be a little bit fuzzy, so having it not matter for take ground or center line or with the ladder placements actually might mean that it just doesn't matter as much, and you can just focus on actually getting your models where they need to go, finding lines that get your opponents in play, and then the background of the board is the background, not the foreground.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I hadn't even noticed that. That's fun. That's a good observation.
Yeah, it is. And then it's also really interesting that I'm kind of take it or leave it with scouting. Personally, I think for new players, it's better to have more decisions happen later in the game, so you don't have to front load your decision making. So in that kind of like principle, I'm like, okay, I guess scouting going away is better for newer people, and that seems fine. I've got to take it or leave it. But one thing I really like actually is recon dash being gone. I didn't realize how much of a change it was until like I got a chance to play it and think about what it can allow, what it can't allow, or can and can't allow. I think it's pretty interesting because it really makes I think it's like made turn 3 way more important now. I think like I don't know if this is like an overgeneralization, but my perception was like mid-table players would trade everything on turn 2, game would be kind of over. I think with scouting dash specifically being removed, I think less will happen on turn 2, leaving more stuff to happen and play out 3-4, which I think is cool. I think like having the game go till later is just kind of like fun and interesting, and I also think it's like better for newer players as they can chunk up their decision making a little more instead of having to like do all of the decision making at the like beginning and then less and less at the end.
Yeah, I could definitely see. I mean, we'll see how that ends up going. I think right now we're in the fun spot of the new meta, and it'll probably be that way until generally like February is when things tend to slow down and people like have optimizations, and we'll see where things are. Otherwise, Zach, anything else you want to shout out? Your personal blog for the photos that you snap all the way around the world. You got the UN shots, you got the AVTT, you do a lot of traveling, you shoot a lot of the Pacific Northwest, you're the streamer for the Pacific Northwest.
We'll see. Hopefully
we head out,
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find disregardingdice.com is where I have a bunch of different photos from all around. I do event photography, taking pictures of people's teams. So you can see WTC photos just went up. There's some absolutely amazing painters there. You'll also find some guides. I have like a guide on novitiates. And then on my YouTube, I have a little tutorial on how to take photos if you're interested, and some older battle reports if for some reason you want to see that. So Disregarding Dice on YouTube. Aside from that, if you live in the greater Seattle area, come check out Waystone Wargaming Speakeasy. That's awesome. If you live around Tacoma, there's Tacoma Games. It's a store that we do monthly events at. And then if you're in the Pacific Northwest, check out the KTC Discord. We'd love to have you. We're always looking for new players. So somehow, if you're listening to this and hear my voice and you haven't played Kill Team yet, come on by. We have teams. You can play your first game of Kill Team same week you hear my voice.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. This is great. It's been rad.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And as always, thank you, listeners, for listening until the end.